Alexander, before we get into the battles, before we get into the empire, before we get into the women and the men and the wine and the blood, I want to start somewhere uncomfortable. Everybody knows the legend of the conqueror who never lost a single battle. But almost nobody knows the truth about where you actually came from. Your own mother, Olympias, spent her entire life telling the ancient world that Philip of Macedon was not your real father. She claims Zeus came down from Olympus in the form of a giant serpent and impregnated her in her sleep. She kept literal snakes in her bed during her religious rituals. Most people listening to that today would say one of two things. Either Olympias was a brilliant manipulator, building a political weapon out of her own child, or she was genuinely losing her grip on reality and dragged you into her madness with her. So which one was she really?
You came in swinging, did you not? All right, let me tell you about my mother, because every historian gets her completely wrong. Olympias was not insane. She was a high priestess of the Dionysian mystery cults from the kingdom of Epirus. These were ancient religious orders that practiced rituals so secret that anyone who revealed them was put to death. The snakes were real. She kept enormous serpents wrapped around her body during her ceremonies because the snake was sacred to Dionysus. Philip walked into her bedchamber one night without warning and saw a massive python coiled around her sleeping body. The ancient writers all agree on what happened next. Philip backed out of that room slowly, and he never touched her the same way again. The most feared warlord in all of Greece was terrified of his own wife. But here is the part nobody wants to admit. Whether or not Zeus actually fathered me is beside the point. My mother spent every single day of my childhood telling me I was the son of a god. She poured that belief into me the way a blacksmith pours molten iron into a sword mold. By the time I was 8 years old, I genuinely believed I was something more than human. And when I finally visited the Oracle of Ammon at Siwa years later, deep in the burning Egyptian desert, the high priest looked me directly in the eyes and called me son of Ammon, son of Zeus. Was she manipulating a child? Of course she was. But that weapon she built conquered Persia, Egypt, Babylon, and pushed all the way to India by the time I was 30. So before you call her insane, ask yourself how many sane mothers in human history have raised sons who reshaped the entire world.
Did you murder your own father?
Pausanias drove the dagger into Philip's chest. That part is settled. He was a member of my father's royal bodyguard, and he stabbed Philip at my sister's wedding ceremony in front of the entire Macedonian aristocracy. The official story is that Pausanias had a personal vendetta. Philip had allowed Attalus and his men to brutally assault Pausanias years earlier, and Philip ignored his pleas for justice. So Pausanias waited and one day buried a Celtic dagger in my father's heart. But here is where the story gets very suspicious. Pausanias tried to escape after the murder. He ran toward horses that had been conveniently waiting just outside the theater entrance, almost like somebody knew he was going to need a fast getaway. He tripped on a vine, and Philip's other bodyguards killed him on the spot. Killed him before he could be questioned. Killed him before he could name a single accomplice. How perfectly tidy. My mother allegedly placed a golden funeral wreath on his corpse. And within just a few weeks of becoming king, I personally eliminated every single rival to my throne. Attalus, executed. Cleopatra Eurydice, my father's new wife, killed. Her infant daughter, killed. My cousin Amyntas, who actually had a stronger legal claim to the throne than I did, executed. Every blood threat to my crown, gone, before the funeral wreaths had even started to wilt. Did I plan it? You cannot prove it. But you also cannot explain how a 20-year-old boy moved with that kind of cold, surgical efficiency, unless he had been thinking about this exact moment for years. So let me ask you something instead. If your own father drew a sword on you in front of the entire royal court, married a woman whose son would replace you, and forced you into exile at 17, how long would you spend mourning him?
You almost died at the Granicus. Reckless or genius?
Both. Picture this scene. The Granicus River, May of 334 BC. I am 22 years old. On the opposite bank, 40,000 Persian soldiers are waiting for me on a steep, muddy slope. Every single one of my generals, including the legendary Parmenion who had served my father for 30 years, told me to wait. Cross the river at dawn, find a flatter approach. Do not charge a defended riverbank with cavalry. That is military suicide. I told him no. I led the companion cavalry straight into that river, splashing through the cold current with the entire army following behind me. The moment I crested the opposite bank, I was completely surrounded. A Persian commander named Mithridates charged at me with a war axe and brought it down on my helmet with both hands. The blade cracked through the bronze and split my scalp open. Blood was pouring down into my eyes. And while I was staggering, a second Persian officer named Mithridates raised his sword behind my head for the killing strike. Clytus the Black, my closest officer at the time, swung his blade and severed Mithridates' arm at the shoulder. 1 single second before that sword would have separated my head from my neck. Think about what that means. The entire history of Western civilization, the spread of Greek culture across 3 continents, the founding of Alexandria, all of it came down to 1/2 second of perfect timing in a muddy river in northwestern Turkey. But the recklessness was the strategy. I needed every Macedonian soldier and every Persian soldier to see their king fighting in the front line, bleeding, killing. After Granicus, no Macedonian ever doubted I would die beside them on the battlefield. And that is the exact reason my men followed me 11,000 miles from home, while Darius's army eventually abandoned him.
Did you really not touch Darius's wife?
Every single ancient source agrees. Plutarch, Arrian, Curtius, Diodorus, every one of them says the same thing. I never laid a finger on Statira, and she was widely considered the most beautiful woman in the entire Persian Empire. I had her in my custody for years. She was right there, and I left her completely untouched. I treated her with the full dignity owed to a queen. And I treated Darius's mother, Gambis, with such genuine warmth that she eventually called me her son. When she heard years later that I had died in Babylon, she reportedly refused to eat or drink and willed herself to death within 5 days. She loved me more than she ever loved her actual biological son. But you want the real reason? It was not because I was some kind of saint. The reason I refused to touch Statira was strategic and, frankly, a little cruel. I wanted Darius, wherever he was hiding, to receive constant reports that his wife was completely untouched. I wanted that knowledge to torture him from the inside out, every night, in his dreams. I wanted him lying awake, realizing that the man who destroyed his army on the battlefield also had more honor and more self-control than he had ever possessed. And it worked. Darius sent me a desperate letter offering me half of his entire empire, 10,000 talents of gold, and his other daughter's hand in marriage if I would just stop chasing him. Half of the largest empire on earth. My general Parmenion read the letter and told me that if he were Alexander, he would accept that offer in a heartbeat. I looked him dead in the eye and said if I were Parmenion, I would too. But I am Alexander, and I do not take half of anything.
Hephaestion. Was it real love?
Hephaestion was the love of my life. Full stop. We met as teenagers at Aristotle's academy in the village of Mieza. We studied philosophy together, mathematics, medicine, military theory. We trained together. We hunted lions in the Macedonian forests. And somewhere in those years between 15 and 18, we became something far more than friends. In our culture, love between men was not hidden in shame. It was celebrated. The sacred band of Thebes, the most elite fighting unit in all of Greece before my father destroyed them at Chaeronea, was composed entirely of male lovers fighting side by side. The Greeks believed men fought harder when their beloved was watching. When Hephaestion and I traveled to Troy together at the start of my Persian campaign, I laid a wreath at the tomb of Achilles, and Hephaestion laid a wreath at the tomb of Patroclus. The entire army watched us in absolute silence, and every single soldier understood exactly what we were saying. We were declaring ourselves to history. Achilles and Patroclus, Alexander and Hephaestion, two warriors, two lovers, bound until death. Hephaestion was not just my lover. He was my political partner, my emotional anchor in every storm. When I was terrified before a battle, he was the only person on earth I could admit that to. The other generals resented his closeness to me, and that resentment would have consequences none of us could predict.
And Roxana?
I desired Roxana the moment I saw her dancing at a feast in Bactria in 327 BC. She was 16 years old, with dark eyes that pulled the light out of the torches. According to every ancient source, she was the most beautiful woman in all of Asia. My generals immediately told me to take her as a war prize, drag her to my tent, do whatever I wanted with her, and discard her in the morning. That was the standard practice of conquerors throughout history. Instead, I asked her father Oxyates for her hand in marriage. I cut a loaf of bread with my sword in the traditional Macedonian wedding ceremony and gave half to Roxana. I made her my queen, not my concubine, not my prize, my queen. Because raw desire without respect is just violence wearing a crown. And then there was Bagoas, the beautiful Persian eunuch who had been Darius's most prized companion. Yes, I took him into my bed too. My Macedonian generals despised it openly. But the most famous moment came at a dance competition in Gedrosia, where Bagoas won the contest, and the entire Macedonian army, thousands of battle-hardened soldiers, started chanting for me to kiss him publicly. So I pulled Bagoas into my arms and kissed him deeply, right there in front of every man under my command. I loved men. I loved women. I desired beauty in every form, and I never once hid any of it from anyone.
When Hephaestion died, you lost your mind. Why?
Because everything inside me died with him. It happened in Ecbatana in October of 324 BC. Hephaestion had been suffering from a fever for several days, but was steadily improving. His doctor, Glaucius, decided to leave his bedside to attend a theater performance in the city. While the doctor was gone, Hephaestion ate a boiled chicken and drank a large quantity of wine, both strictly forbidden by his medical orders. His fever spiked violently within hours, and he was dead before Glaucius even returned. When I got the news, I ran to his body and refused to leave it for an entire day and night. I lay across his corpse and wept until my voice was completely gone. Then I had Glaucius crucified for negligence. Was it excessive? Of course. But a doctor had abandoned his patient, and the only person on earth who truly knew the real me had died because of it. I shaved my head. I cut the manes and tails of every single horse and mule in the entire army. I ordered the sacred eternal flame at the temple of Ecbatana extinguished, which was something only ever done when a Persian king died. I refused to eat for days. And then I marched my entire army into the mountains and slaughtered the Kosayan tribe down to almost the last man. I called it a blood offering to send Hephaestion's spirit safely into the underworld. The funeral pyre I commissioned for him was over 200 feet tall. It cost 12,000 talents of silver, which translates to roughly $300 million today. Was it psychotic? Probably. But Hephaestion was the only person on this entire planet who knew the real Alexander. Not the conqueror, not the living god, just the boy from Pella who used to lie awake at night, terrified of being ordinary. When Hephaestion died, that boy died with him.
Tyre. 2,000 crucifixions. How?
The Tyrians took my peace ambassadors, the men I sent under a flag of truce, and they slit their throats on top of the city walls. Then they threw the corpses down into the sea, while my entire army watched from the shoreline. That was their answer to my offer of mercy. So I made an example out of Tyre that the entire ancient world would remember for centuries. I ordered my engineers to build a causeway half a mile long through open ocean to reach their island fortress. We literally built a stone road through the middle of the sea. It took 7 brutal months. The Tyrians poured boiling oil down on us, launched flaming ships at the causeway, and killed hundreds of my workers during construction. When we finally breached the walls, 8,000 Tyrians died in the fighting. After the battle was over, I crucified 2,000 of their surviving soldiers along the entire coastline. 2,000 crosses stretching for miles down the beach. The remaining 30,000 civilians were sold into slavery. Was it cruel? Of course. But the news spread faster than my army could march. The next city I came to was Gaza, and they tried to resist as well. I dragged their commander Battis behind my chariot by hooks driven through his ankles until he was dead. After Gaza fell, no city between the Mediterranean and the Indus River ever resisted me again. They opened their gates the moment they saw my standards on the horizon. That is not sadism. That is the brutal mathematics of conquest.
You killed Clitus, the man who saved your life.
I do not live with it. Even now, telling you this story, I feel like I am suffocating. We were at a feast in Samarkand in 328 BC. I had been drinking heavily for hours. My companions were comparing me to Heracles, calling me greater than my father, suggesting openly that I was already a living god. And then Clitus, also drunk and furious, stood up and told the entire room to shut their mouths. He said my victories belonged to the brave Macedonian soldiers who bled for me. He said I had become too Persian. He said I had abandoned everything that made Macedon great. And then he said the words that ended his life. He said my father Philip had been twice the king I would ever be. I grabbed a sarissa from a nearby guard and drove it straight through Clitus's chest. He dropped at my feet without making a single sound. The moment his body hit the ground, the wine cleared from my head like somebody had thrown ice water on me. I tried to turn the spear on myself to drive the bloody point into my own throat, but my bodyguards wrestled it away from me. I locked myself in my private quarters for 3 days. I refused to eat. I refused to drink. I screamed until my throat bled and my voice was completely gone. And here is the part that haunts me. Clitus was right. Every single word he said to me that night was true. And I murdered him for the unforgivable crime of telling me the truth at a moment when I was too drunk to handle hearing it. That is the kind of monster wine turns me into. A man who kills the people he loves most because their honesty is too painful to bear.
Did you murder 40,000 of your own men in the desert?
11,000 miles from Macedon. 8 straight years of non-stop warfare, every enemy defeated, and I told my men that the great ocean at the edge of the world was just a few months away. But on the bank of the Hyphasis River in India, my General Coenus stood up and spoke for the entire army. He said the men wanted to go home. They wanted to see their wives. They wanted to hold their children who had been born and grown into total strangers while their fathers were marching. He said they had given me everything and had nothing left. I went into my tent and refused to come out for 3 full days. They did not change their minds. So, for the first and only time in my entire military career, I turned around. I built 12 massive altars on the riverbank to mark the farthest eastern edge of my empire. And then we began the long march home. But the route I chose home went straight through the Gedrosian desert. 60 days of absolute hell. Temperatures so high that men's blood would feel like it was boiling. No water for stretches of 50 miles. Sandstorms that buried entire columns of sleeping soldiers alive in a single night. 70,000 men entered that desert, and somewhere between 20 and 40,000 never came out. Did I choose that route to punish my army for refusing to follow me east? The honest answer is that I do not know anymore. I was angry enough to do it. The fury I felt at the Hyphasis was unlike anything I had ever experienced. My own loyal army had told me no. They had put a leash on a god. But I walked through that desert on foot alongside my men. There is a famous story where a soldier brought me a helmet with a small puddle of water in it, the only water for miles. I poured it into the sand in front of the entire army, because if my men could not drink, then neither would their king. Whatever my reasons, I refused to exempt myself from a single moment of the suffering.
Were you poisoned in Babylon?
Probably, yes. It started with 2 solid days of feasting in Babylon in June of 323 BC. On the second night, I drank a massive bowl of unmixed wine, which is essentially pure alcohol. The moment that wine hit my stomach, a pain ripped through my body so violently that I genuinely thought somebody had stabbed me with a hidden knife. Within hours, the fever consumed me. Within days, I could not stand. Within a week, I could not form words. My generals filed past my bed one by one. I could see their faces, I could hear their voices, but I could not move or speak a single word back to them. Antipater, my regent back home in Macedon, had every motivation to want me dead. I had been openly threatening to remove him from his position. His son Cassander was personally present at the feast that night. The ancient sources claim the poison was transported all the way from Macedon inside a hollowed-out mule's hoof, because the substance was so corrosive it would dissolve any metal or clay container. And Cassander, years later, personally murdered my wife Roxana and my young son Alexander IV to make absolutely sure no heir of mine could ever rise up and challenge his power. That is not the behavior of an innocent man. So yes, I think they poisoned me. And then they wept beautifully at my funeral because they needed the entire world to believe in their loyalty. The men who stood weeping around my deathbed that day were the exact same men who tore my empire to shreds the moment my heart stopped beating. The wars of the Diadochi lasted 40 years. Hundreds of thousands of people died fighting over the pieces of what I had built with my own blood. Everything I created was destroyed by the hands of men who called me brother.